Welcome to Journey with Lay podcast. We discuss leadership, culture, and how to take your business to new heights. Your host, Lay Wang, is an adventurer, motivational speaker, and executive coach. Join us each week to learn how you and your team can reach your highest aspirations. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, Lei Wang here, host of this show. This episode is brought to you by Journey with Lei, where I help business leaders create a culture of excitement, build highly engaged teams, and consistently perform at their peak. Start tapping into your powers of excitement and take your career and your business to new heights today. Go to journeywithlei.com or email hello@journeywithlei.com. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Shannon Paulson, who introduced me to today's guest. Shannon is an author, speaker, and one of the first women to fly Apache helicopter in the U.S. Army. Shannon was on the show just a couple of months ago, and I will put the link in the show notes for everyone. So today, our special guest is Sandy Stosz. Admiral Sandy Stosz is the first woman to command an icebreaker on the Great Lakes and to lead the U.S. Armed Forces Service Academy. Sandy served for 12 years at sea, commanding 2 ships and led large Coast Guard organizations during times of crisis and complexity. She finished her 40 years career as the first woman assigned as Deputy Commandant at Mission Support, directing one of the Coast Guard's largest enterprises. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lei, for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, I only read the highlights of your career because there's too many stories I know you want to share with people. So would you manage to tell a little bit about your career, your journey, your path?
Thank you. That's a great place to start. I always start when I give talks to groups with my childhood and where I develop my core values, because I think that your personal core values define your character, which is the foundation of who you are. And if you're in a position where you're leading other people, you've got to be comfortable with who you are, what your values are, and you've got to have strong character. So I was born and raised in a little town called Ellicott City, Maryland, and I was born in 1960. And I say that for context because by the time I got into high school, the equal rights movement had provided Title IX in 1972, and that was equal opportunity in education for girls and women. And then we had 1973, the Equal Rights Amendment. And then in 1975, when I was in high school, the service academies, that's the Coast Guard Academy where I went to school, West Point up in New York, Annapolis, right around the corner from where I lived in Maryland, and Colorado Springs, the Air Force Academy, and Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy. All those were required to open their doors to women on the heels of this equal rights movement. And it was an opportunity for a young girl to be able to apply to something that hadn't been available up until then. So when I was a junior in high school, I put my application into the Naval Academy, which was right next door, because I had seen the news that this new opportunity was available to women that had never been available before. And in childhood, I had developed core values that I learned from my parents, that I learned from my coaches, because I was an athlete. I had worked in the summers and done farm labor, which is really hard. So I had developed personal core values of honesty and humility and hard work and perseverance. And those really served me well as I got into high school and started to apply to the Naval Academy. And then I applied to the Coast Guard Academy as an alternate. And my guidance counselor had told me, Sandy, you've got to cast a wider net. You can't just apply to one college. And he said, look at this flyer that I got from this place called the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. And we both poured over that flyer. And between the two of us, we decided, well, this is a small Navy, so I'll apply there too. And thankfully, I got accepted at the Coast Guard Academy and never looked back to the Navy. I took that appointment and made my way in the Coast Guard for the next 40 years. But it all started in childhood with developing the core values and the character that I needed to give me the strength to persevere and make it through high school and into the Coast Guard Academy, where I was in the third class with women, and there were only 5% of us women in a corps of cadets of about 1,000, so mostly men, and we were very isolated and alone because the men didn't want women at their academy. So it was really hard, and it was hard on your self-confidence. And I'd already had low self-confidence as a young girl. And that was another part of my journey, was learning how to believe in myself. But I made it with my core values, hard work and perseverance, honesty and humility, through the Coast Guard Academy, graduated, and started my career in the Coast Guard. And I'll stop there, Leah. I know that's a lot of information, but I think it's important to get the background when you're talking about your leadership journey.
Yeah, I love that story. Actually, because I started my career in the IT, in technology. When I went to college, there were only 3 girls in my class. And when I remember the first day when I walked into the computer lab, I looked like, oh my God, the whole big room, the computer lab, they're all dressed in either blue or green or black because they're all boys. Like I walked in, I almost want to turn around, like I don't see where I can sit. It's like I feel really awkward. So yeah, I can't imagine. So you as one of the first women in the military at that time. So how did you establish yourself, your confidence, your see where I fit in? So how do you put your foot in?
So I believe I had an advantage, and it goes back to my childhood. I think it's so important how young people are raised. So I was raised with 3 brothers. So you can see that already I was comfortable with boys, and my parents treated us all the same. I think that was really important. They thought that it didn't matter that I was a girl. I was a tomboy. I was doing the same things as my brothers did. There was an expectation that all of us kids would do our best, would be honest, that we would go on to college when we came out of high school. I think that VOTEC would have been fine too, but there was an expectation we went on beyond high school to further our development. And so I did struggle with the confidence. It was exacerbated at the Coast Guard Academy with all those men, but I had 3 brothers. So I think that I dug into the power of being different. And when I say that, what I mean is, as the only woman or girl in a group of students at the Coast Guard Academy, I had been there as the one girl with 3 brothers and all their friends. So I'm the one who felt like that was normal. It was the men who were a little bit off balance. So when I discovered that power of being different, it wasn't really a weakness when I decided to flip it and look at it as a power. And I was able to walk into that classroom with the same apprehensions that you had, Lay, going into your classroom for IT. But I was able to walk into that classroom and start up a conversation with somebody. So that broke the ice. So I learned that to succeed in a male environment, there's a few things you can do. You can start by taking the initiative to break the ice, reach out your hand. And too often we women kind of complain about the men don't accept us. We don't feel like we fit in. But what have we done to look inside us first and reach out our hand to break the ice and ask to be part of the group? And then I think what you do is you kind of tactfully set standards with the men you're working with on what's appropriate. Sometimes they just, in my day, we're talking 30 years ago when I started, and even today still, sometimes the men just don't understand the difference is the expectations of the workforce climate, but you can kind of help them set that standard and let them know what's acceptable and what's not. You need to project confidence in order to fit in. If you don't, you're just going to be left on the sidelines. And I think you need to look around you and learn what you can, listen carefully to what people are saying, and ask questions. And I think if you do all that, show interest in people, ask their opinion, that puts you a little bit vulnerable, but it also empowers the men. And they're like, oh, I can help this person. And you start to develop a rapport. So I think that's how I overcame a little bit of my lack of confidence, was going back to the power of being different and projecting that power. And I was able to succeed using that talent, I guess you might say.
Love that story. Actually, when you were telling your story, I was smiling because that reminds me a lot about my own story, my own grow up. Like I saw so much parallel. So I kind of the same thing. I grew up with two brothers. And so before I went to old enough to go to school, I was climbing trees, playing soccer, catching birds, do whatever my brothers do. I just never thought about it. If my brother got to fight, I go out to fight with other kids too. So I never think girls behave like this or that. And my father was always the same, always telling me, like, I don't see the difference between boys and the girls. So if the boys can do this, why you cannot do it? So I never thought there's anything holding me back. So I always like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want. I want to study this. I want to participate in that activity. I want to do anything. So I never felt any like, oh, because I'm the minority, because I'm the only one, I couldn't do this. And also talking about the confidence, I had a funny story when I started my college, right? So yeah, first day walking into the lab was like a bit shocking. And the next thing was shocking, was funny, was going to dining hall. And the dining hall was a chaos. Oh, the boys, there's no line. Boys just like pushing each other, getting in the front to get whatever they want to buy for the lunch. And I was like, no way I can fight with them. So I actually came back hungry. I couldn't get my lunch the first day in college. And then I just discovered one thing really secret for my confidence building was funny is, at that time, as a student, you dress pretty casually. However, I just happened to have a suit as a gift from one of my relatives. So I wore the suit, the gray color suit, look like a business woman as a freshman in college. I was wearing that. And other people look at me thinking, oh, I must be the senior student. I must be a leader in the class. So they ask me questions. Then I give them direction. Okay, yeah, we can go to do that. So I realized, oh, people all asking me for direction. So I started organizing. All right, let's our class do this, do that. So all other people regard me as a leader, and other students, they were also new. So they regard me as a leader. So I just naturally, accidentally, just plugged myself in as a leader. So I never felt like, oh, I had this little bit insecurity, lack of confidence, but other people just, oh, need that. I realized no one else has that. So I just, okay, I'll take charge. I'll organize things for everyone so we can feel no one is lonely. Yeah, so like it just sort of so funny. We're in different world, but so many things in parallel.
And you really started that by presenting yourself professionally in a business suit. And I think sometimes today we have all this virtual meetings. People are wearing their pajamas or sweatpants. And I think how you present yourself indicates your professionalism, and that gains respect. And I have a little analogy of the 3 Ps of power that I'll share with the audience. And I think this will make you successful, even if you're not particularly confident. It's a little tool to overcome a lack of confidence. And it started, I learned this lesson from my boss, my first boss, when I was in my early 20s. I had just started out in the Coast Guard. I was on a ship. And I was having a hard time getting one of the people who was reporting to me, who worked for me, to do the job that he needed to do. And once again, it was almost all men on this ship. It was a polar icebreaker going to Antarctica, 200 people and about 15 women. And only 2 of us women who were officers, who were the leaders, who had a lot of people reporting to us. So my boss looked at me and said, Sandy, there's 3 Ps of power. And if you're going to succeed, you need to know how to use them. He said there's personal power, professional power, and position power. And, you know, in the military, it's all about position. But he said, if you're going to succeed, you need to learn how to lean on the first 2, the personal power and the professional power, and only use position power as a last resort. And Lei, when you were telling that story about going into the dining facility, you didn't have position power. You had to use your personal power and your professional power. And your professional power is how you present yourself, how you dress, how you carry yourself with some confidence that presents confidence. And the personal power is your ability to motivate and influence on other people to persuade people to do what you want them to do. So you were able to take a place of no position and use your personal and professional power to succeed in making your way in an environment where you were one of the only women. So those 3 P's of power, I try to live those every day and never use my position power, even though I started to get, after 40 years, I got pretty senior. I had a high position. And the more senior I got, the more I tried not to use the position power. It becomes more tempting to use that first. I force myself to go back like every day to build trust and earn respect by using my personal powers and my professional power.
I like how you analyze the story and share this lesson, because I think that's your secret sauce of how you gain respect as a woman in a male-dominated environment. And I know today, like the DEI is a big topic, and many young professionals, women or of color or of whatever background, have a similar question, like, as a minority, as the one who looks like outside the inner circle, how do I gain leadership? So I wonder if you can expand that a little bit on how this lesson can help professionals, especially people who are of color, minority, women, but how do they progress as a leader in today's environment?
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question. And I think that when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as you said, there's a lot of perspectives. And I would argue 2 things. Well, I would state that I'm one perspective, one of many. And I would argue that there are many perspectives and that they're not right or wrong. So many times nowadays, we get asked questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the person who's answering it is convinced that they have the right answer and the only answer. And we need to broaden our perspective. So I would start with that sometimes if you're the only woman, the only minority, the only one who's different in a room, go back to my power of being different for one thing. But on the other hand, you might be the only one who really thinks that you're different and sees yourself as different. You might be in a workplace where people just look past it. They don't care that you're a woman or a minority. They want to see what you can do and what you can bring to the team. And that's what really matters. And too often, I think we're conditioned by society to define ourselves by our external features, our gender, our race, our ethnicity, instead of defining ourselves by where we've been, what we've experienced, what we've done, our skills. How about cognitive diversity of how we think, our personalities? We bring so much to the table based on those kinds of diversity that are highly valued. So if you're a woman, like you and I are, Lay, in a workplace mostly dominated by men, in today's workplace, you might not be at a disadvantage. You might be advantaged because they've been taught and people have been accustomed to now looking for that diversity and appreciating it. And more often than not, my experiences was I was overburdened because people wanted the woman's perspective. So, and to this day, I find myself pulled in a million directions by people who want me on their corporate board or want me here, want me there because I'm a woman. They're not going out to white men like that. So I think it can be an advantage. And I think that you need to look at it that way. If you're a woman or minority, and look at the power you bring by being different. So I'm going to go back to that. And you don't need to look up. And this whole thing about you have to see one to be one, I just have to say that doesn't fly for me. If the first astronauts who went to the moon, John Glenn, had said, I have to see an astronaut up there on the moon to go, or I'm not going to go, we would never have had a man on the moon. So why do I have to have a woman who's a role model? Why can't I have men like I had all my career, very devoted, interested, dedicated men who wanted to help a young woman succeed? And I was a receptive mentee. So I was looking for role models, and I didn't exclude men and just have to say I have to have a woman mentor me. And I found amazing role models, mentors, and heroes who looked nothing like me, of both genders and all races and ethnicities. And I found that by having a rich variety of mentors and a rich variety of people who I brought in on my team, that all of us were better for it. And we were our own worst enemies when we come to a workplace and presume before we even get there that we're going to be disadvantaged because we're a woman or minority.
Yeah, actually, you answered the question. Actually, the next question I was about to ask is about mentors. So now you already answered that. And I think it's a very important point. So there are two parts in this answer. One is when we look at every situation, we can say I have a disadvantage. I have some kind of challenge. But the other way, you can flip it to say, well, this is a unique opportunity for me to shine. And then you can turn it into an advantage, turn it into your strength. So that's like a lot of time when in the coaching we say the mindset. Every situation, you can say, yes, there's some reason why you cannot succeed as a leader, cannot succeed at whatever. But there's also, you can turn it around to say, this is my opportunity to grow, to become a stronger leader.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think people listening to your podcast should think beyond themselves. So right now, you and I are having a conversation. We're talking about what a person would do in a workplace. Well, what about other people in the workplace who can support each other? And I'll give you an example of that. So it doesn't just, you're not an island in a workplace. There's lots of people who can be your allies. And my example is I was about 30 years old. So this is many years ago, but I was a young officer taking command of that icebreaker on the Great Lakes. So as the first woman to command a ship of any kind on the Great Lakes, I was stationed in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and I was coming from a job where I was the military assistant to the Secretary of Transportation, where the Coast Guard was positioned at the time. So this is a cabinet secretary. The equivalent today would be Secretary Buttigieg. And I was the military aide. So it was a senior position for a young person. And I report to the ship and I'm excited. It's all men. I'm the first woman. But after my installation ceremony, my boss, who's much senior to me, he's a senior officer in the Coast Guard. He commands all the units in the local area, including the ship that I'm commanding. Anyway, he looks at me and says, "You're just the secretary's fair-haired golden girl. We'll see how long you last." And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm already having to deal with the media interviewing me about being the first woman. What's it going to be like? They're interviewing my crew. What's it like to have a woman coming on board? And now my boss thinks that I don't belong here. And it was stressful because I felt like I had to prove myself to my boss. And then what did my crew think? So I did my best. And I followed all the advice that I've told you so far, going around the ship, looking and listening and learning and trying to break the ice with my men. And I was doing the best I could. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job. But my boss did keep picking on me, demanding, things that wouldn't be reasonable for if I was just another male captain. So anyway, one day he backed off and I couldn't figure it out. And a couple years later, I found out why. One of my men, there was probably 17 men on the ship. One of my men who was more senior, he was an enlisted guy. He was the deck force head who's responsible for the anchoring and all the topside functions. He had gone up to the captain, closed the door, and said to the captain, "You've got to back off our skipper, our commanding officer, because she's doing a good job and you're confusing the crew. It's generating bad morale because we see her doing a good job. You're constantly questioning her, challenging her, picking on her. You've got to stop it." And to the captain's credit, he did. He stopped it. But that guy, his name is Dave Foley. He's one of my best friends to this day. And that was 30 years ago. We have a lifelong friendship, but he was my ally. So what can people in the workplace do to support their colleagues who are women and minorities, or somebody different, somebody who just thinks differently and is kind of maybe the geek in the office and gets picked on? What can you do to support those people by being an ally and being deliberate and reaching out your hand to welcome somebody into a lunch gathering? So make a seat at the table in the cafeteria, to get back to your story. Wouldn't it have been nice if you'd looked around that cafeteria the first day and some guys had kind of waved you over and made some. Whoops. Sorry, I just, in my excitement for those who are listening, I knocked over something.
That's an exciting story.
But wouldn't it have been great if the guys had waved you over and made some space next to them and said, "Hey, Lay, come sit down with us"? That didn't happen.
What
It's right?
Wow, in college age, when a boy make that gesture, no later means some other message there.
So it's really complicated. So this is a complicated stuff. And that's why I'm glad you're asking these questions on the podcast, because there's a personal responsibility for your own success and fitting in, but then you have a responsibility for your colleagues. You should try to be an ally, try to be a mentor to other people in the office so that everybody has a positive environment where they can thrive.
Yeah, what a great story. Love the both sides. So one side, when you are in an uncharted course, when you are the only one, don't have to say, because there's no one ahead of me, I cannot be the first. I think that's an opportunity for you. All right, I can be the first one. There's nothing wrong. I have to have a role model look like me. If there's no one like that, you can think, why cannot I be the role model for other people who are looking for this kind of role model? And also for the people who are not a minority or who is not in any other kind of special positioning, but you can be the ally, you can be the support to help advocate the cause for more people. So I love the two sides of this story. That's a great lesson for everyone.
Yeah, I think these lessons are important because it gives hope to people who maybe are looking through a narrow lens. And I think all of us have done that. We've gotten into a tough position at work or school or at home, and you start to see things in a very narrow lens, and you've got to lift your head up. And one way that I've gotten through hard times is to look at small segments. So I've taken it one meal at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time. Because if you look at like a 2-year obligation, so say you're in a 2-year school program and it's really hard, or you're on a 2-year assignment and it's tough. There's a boss that's hard to get along with. If you look at 2 full years, you might just give up because it's too long to even imagine. But if you look at it, okay, I'm going to get through this 1 meal at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time. And then pretty soon the days and weeks are flying by. So I found that if I looked up at the bigger picture and said, hey, this is a small segment of my life or career, I can get through this one piece at a time. I found that to be a good coping mechanism instead of letting it all pile up as a huge wall in front of you, or a huge mountain, to put it more along the lines of what you're familiar with, Lei.
Yeah, that's exactly. I was thinking every time when I step on a mountain, every time I look at the mountain, it's always huge. Feel like, oh my God, how many days is it going to take? How long are going to take? And can I survive to the end? Then, okay, don't care about how far they're going to be. Just think, if I make one step forward, I'll be one step closer. Just focus on one step at a time. And just plant your head in and think, okay, I'm ready to go forever. Doesn't matter how long it takes. Just one step at a time.
That's exactly right. That is such good advice. And so you found that climbing mountains, and I found it just climbing through a job. And I think everybody who's listening can find a way to take their life one step, one meal, one day at a time. And it doesn't mean that your life is hard, because when you get to the top of that mountain, when you summit, you're seeing that beautiful view. And when you succeed in the quest, like to get a 2-year college degree, associate's degree, and it's been really hard, you get your diploma, you cross that stage, it was all worth it, right?
Yeah, when you look back, everything worth it. But when you were starting out, we often got intimidated because we feel like that insurmountable obstacle in front of us. So I think the big lesson is always knowing, if I keep moving forward one step at a time, one day I'm going to look back and I'm on top of the mountain and look back at the path. Oh, that's actually pretty easy. But I know nothing was easy. And especially for you having such a long career in the Coast Guard. And I wonder if you can share with us some stories of situations you had to make a tough decision. I bet there's many situations like that.
When you're a leader, you have to make hard decisions. And the more senior you get, the higher up you get in an organization, the harder the decisions are, because all the easy ones have been made. So by the time I got to be a little more senior, they were hard decisions. And part of what was hard about them was you had to accept some risk. So there's no hard decision that comes without risk. And when you have to manage the risk, you have to make a decision that has some consequences. And often those consequences are on people. So not everybody wins with a decision that's made. And a lot of leaders will fail to make a decision because they don't want to rock the boat. They just want to let it lie, and then nothing happens. And you got to make decisions. So I wanted to start out with that by saying leadership is all about decision making, and you can't abdicate those decisions as a leader. You've got to embrace the risk, recognize that you're going to have to disappoint some people, and that not everyone wins. And you got to understand, I learned this a long time ago, and it's kind of a cliche to say that you can please some of the people some of the time and you should be happy, but it's true. If you try to please all the people all the time, you're going to be the unhappiest leader in the world because you'll never please everybody. So I think that's important to start with. When I was on a ship, I was captain of a ship about 210 feet long out of stationed in Maine. And it was just after 9/11, the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And we were sent down to patrol the waters off of New York Harbor, because New York is, of course, where the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers happened. And it was a stressful time in our country's history. And I know some of your listeners don't even remember that. They weren't born. But we were really working hard because everybody wanted to put every bit of effort they could into patrolling, whether you were on a Coast Guard cutter or whether you were in the New York City Police Department or whether you were Customs and Border Protection or any agency. You were trying to keep America safe. And there weren't enough resources. You didn't know where the threat would come from. So people who were leading in that situation had to make decisions on where to put their scarce resources and how to deploy their people. And so what happened was we were putting down a lot of time, 6 weeks at a time, patrolling in all kinds of weather in the wintertime off of New York City, boarding ships that came in. So there was some fear that big merchant ships would come from overseas and enter the port of New York with maybe a dirty nuclear bomb on board. We didn't know what threat might come next. So we were really working hard boarding these ships. Everybody was exhausted. And there came a time when I started to realize as the leader that if I didn't do something, we were just going to wear ourselves down very slowly without hardly noticing it until we were going to have an accident that hurt somebody or killed somebody or damaged the ship. So I called my crew together one day, several weeks into this, and I said, look, we're all getting exhausted. I can see the fatigue everywhere. We can't go on like this. I said, I'm ordering everybody, letting you know that we're going to focus on equal time on this three-legged stool of operations, which is doing all the boardings and all the patrols, operations, training, which we have to do to keep sharp, and crew rest. So what we were doing was we were giving up training and crew rest to put everything onto the operation. And we're eroding our readiness, eroding our personal readiness with our sleep, eroding our mission readiness by not training and doing the basic drills that keep you sharp so you don't have an accident doing a complex operation. And when you're doing this, lowering your small boat, sending it over, climbing up onto a big ship and having to interrogate the crew and clean your weapons and make sure that everything is squared away, it's very challenging. So by giving the crew permission to back off on the operations, and I said, look, we're going to split evenly so this three-legged stool is balanced. And so it was a big decision because there was people who wanted to see the ships out there doing all the operations, but they didn't know what we were going through out there, that we needed to balance. So that might sound like a simple decision that wasn't like life or death, but it could have been. So I took the preemptive tact of avoiding the bad outcome by telling the crew to balance everything. And they needed to hear that from the leader because they were motivated to do the best they could. And they were going to go until they died. So sometimes the leader has to look at the bigger picture and intervene to make a decision on the operations tempo and to slow things down. And I think a lot of leaders found themselves in this position during COVID, leading their organizations through COVID. How do you balance all these things that get out of balance And how does a leader look and make the tough decisions to pull back in some areas and increase effort in others and take care of the people? And I think that's really what leadership is all about, is making those tough decisions that create a balance.
Yeah. And I think your message is especially relevant in today's time because during the past 2 years of all the pandemic, the isolation, all the leadership work environment went through so many changes in balance, taking care of our people. A lot of things sound very trivial, very small. Actually, it's really big. So, and I see our time is coming up pretty fast. So I wonder if you could give some advice to today's leader who are leading through this change of time of crisis. Maybe in some of your examples, what are the best practice or best advice you can share with leaders today?
So thanks for that question. What I'll do is I'll give you a strategic level answer, because at the tactical level, and I know this is military talk, but strategic is the big picture, tactical is the day-to-day. So at the day-to-day level, each organization is going to be different. At the strategic level, I have the 4 A's for managing through crisis. And that is, you have to anticipate, adapt, and be agile and adjust. So those 4 A's. So what happens is you have to anticipate and look over the horizon to see what might be coming next. So a good leader is not just got their head down doing the business day to day. They're looking up and over the horizon to see what might be coming next. What's the customer going to want next year? What is going to change based on the COVID that's going to change our environment? And what do I need to change in my organization to meet that new need? So anticipating the change. And then adapting to what you see by recognizing what you have to do, implementing changes to meet the new threats or opportunities that are coming over the horizon, adjusting. So you adjust your mindset. So you got to actually embrace change, not just tolerate change. And how many of us want to change? And all this being ready for the next crisis involves being ready to change and change quickly. And that's where the agile part comes. You've got to be prepared so that you can be agile and adjust and adapt and be agile and make those changes. And most of us aren't that way. We're kind of set in our ways. We're comfortable where we are. We like our routine. We don't want any interruptions to that. And this whole thing about anticipating what might happen, adjusting, adapting, and being agile, those counter to human nature. So it's a cultural change that I would recommend that leaders start to try to adopt with their workforce. And it takes time to change minds and change attitudes. I think that's part of why you see the Great Resignation now, is people, they're uncomfortable where they are. There is a lot of change. There is a lot of adjusting and adapting and being agile. And it's got everybody in a spin. So I think that starting with the anticipation and trying to change the culture while you're taking care of people and helping them through it is what I would offer as a recipe for dealing with this ever-changing world that we're facing.
Wow, what a great advice. And that's exactly actually what I was seeing in my corporate clients. The successful leaders are very agile. They know things are different and they know how to adapt. They try to learn from their team members, try to learn from best practice, try to learn from coaches, just adopt and change along with what needs to take care of their team better. And some other leaders still leading the same style and they're frustrated. That's why we can see a big divide on the business who succeed, who will fail in today's environment.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you, Sandy, so much for your valuable advice and insights. So where can people go to find out more about you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's really easy to find. It's www.sandrastosz.com. I've got a tab for my book. I've got a tab for my media, and I've got a tab for my blog. So every week I write a blog called Leading with Character, and it's a different topic on character-centered leadership. So I invite everyone to check my blog out, check my book out. You can order the book anywhere books are sold.
Thank you, Sandy. I will make sure I put that in the show notes so everyone can find it easily. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy, for your service to the country, and thank you for being my guest today. I'm really honored to have you.
Thank you, Lei. It's my honor to be here and be interviewed by you. You're such an accomplished woman, and I love the way you live by excitement.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Journey with Lei. What's your most valuable takeaway from today's episode? What is one step that you are inspired to take? Start tapping into your power of excitement and become the leader you are always meant to be. If you dare to dream it, you can achieve it. Go to journeywithlei.com or email hello@journeywithlei.com. We'll see you again next week.